wanted to talk about the idea of genius, but hadn't really thought of what to say yet, so I'm just gonna dive in. But yes, genius, as we know, always means, you know, some kind of extraordinary intelligence, right? That's what people think of genius as meaning. But then, of course, everyone has their own sense of what that extraordinary intelligence might be. Sometimes very different. Some people would have very specific ideas about what genius means, but at the same time, most people would assume that so-and-so, either a scientist, a mathematician, or an artist, you know, Mozart or Einstein or whoever, you know, obviously they're a genius, you know, Shakespeare, obviously he's a genius, and everyone sort of gets that, but at the same time may dispute or assume the meaning to be, you know, maybe something slightly different from person to person. And I'm not sure if there is really an official meaning, but the way that I would think of genius is to do with being able to understand things for yourself without being taught them. And I see it as having to do with the fact that every individual is a part of everything else. And so, depending on the awareness of the individual, you can tap into everything else. And so you can understand things without having to be taught them. And so I would say that that is what genius is, and that everybody has genius to some degree. Sometimes it's kind of asleep completely, but I would say that everyone has a little genius, or a bit of genius, or a lot of genius. And when we're talking about a genius, that would be a case of saying that this person's genius, this person's innate knowing, has dominated and been freed to become the essential thing. So, like, this person is a genius because they have become their genius, and it's so obvious. It dominates, and also for that reason it means that they have achieved this and that somebody who would be considered like more normal couldn't achieve. So it's amazing that this person has achieved that, and clearly this person is a genius. But I would say that everyone has a genius, and the thing that interests me about that is not so much the idea of like, oh, isn't it great when you got a genius like Mozart or whatever. I mean, that is great. But the thing that interests me, and almost on a daily basis, kind of at some point will occupy my thinking as an important thing, is the idea that everyone has this potential and everyone is currently experiencing genius. And my feeling is that, like, this should be valued, and this should be acknowledged, and that it's great that everyone can tap into their genius. And so I'm more interested in, like, the substance of genius rather than necessarily the idea of an individual being particularly impressive or like of exceptional intelligence. It's more like those moments of genius, you know, or like the idea of lots of people talk about this because it's a good point. Children's paintings and drawings tend to be very beautiful because of the genius of children. Like, children tend to they've maintained whatever genius they had left over from the last life that wasn't sort of too suppressed or trodden on or conditioned. And that is maintained into this life, and because not too much conditioning has taken place yet in this life, they're much more in touch with that genius, and they don't have the They don't have the conscious experience of learning craft as much as the average adult, but you see much more genius in the work, and the work tends to be more beautiful than the average work by an adult, even though it's a bit crude normally. But like, that's a good example of what I mean about genius not necessarily being a great feat. You know, it's very everyday, and that's what's important about it. It should be more everyday. And I think, yes. So what is that? Yeah, I think that is the fact that we're a part of everything else anyway, and so we can always tap into everything else, and we can just know things. And also, what I wanted to talk about was the idea that I think that people, if they wanted to, can become geniuses, and they can you know, in the same way that you can go to the gym or you can take up a hobby or whatever. I think that it's possible for people to decide to try and locate their genius and experiment with thinking and feeling and doing things in a genius way, even if it's nothing spectacular, although it probably would be, even if it's a small thing. But so yeah, I also wanted to talk about the idea of, like, what if it was possible to experiment with being genius, and what that might entail. I was thinking about that. I was thinking, well, okay, the main reason, I think, maybe there's two, but the main reason that a lot of people are not aware of their genius is because of conditioning. I kind of mentioned that in regards to the kids' paintings. It's also to do with death, because each time you die, you're left disorientated, or rather, each time you're born, you're left disorientated, and it takes a while to kind of like pull yourself together. And whilst you lose a lot of conditioning in the process, you are still also going to be very baffled by the experience of it existing in such a fresh way, you know, from scratch. And so I think because people are always, like, to some degree kept at like an Etch-a-Sketch sort of level of only ever sort of learning things consciously so far, obviously that's going to maybe keep our genius down a bit, whilst at the same time it's going to keep it's going to get rid of the conditioning as well. So basically the conditioning is like almost everything which is which has to do with, you know, society, the control system, the fact that everybody is very controlled. And unfortunately, genius is like the least popular thing to the individuals who are in control of, or at least trying to control the population. And genius is a problem for these individuals because people thinking for themselves is going to be a headache, because it means, you know, people will be doing things which are not prescribed, you know. And basically we are taught to suppress our own genius, because that way we are more easily controlled. This is a fact of life, and this is what's happening. And so basically it's much easier to be genius than I think a lot of people think. But we're sort of constantly distracted by alternatives to genius, and sort of, you know, kept numb, kept uninspired, other than by a prescribed idea, and sort of our genius is kept at bay. And so, like, we are taught to suppress our genius, and we're taught to even hate our genius, and even to distrust and dislike anybody who might be displaying genius, unless it happens to be a prescribed cultural trend at the time, which has ulterior motives. And there's a thing that happens, which is where you'll get some genius breaking through, and you'll get some authentic sort of craze of beauty and something progressive and great, and then this will be co-opted, and it will either be co-opted, well, it will normally be co-opted for two reasons. The one reason, more obvious, being that, well, if this is popular, let's also make money out of an idea like that, or that kind of thing, or gain influence by using this, the force of this thing which is quite popular. That's one reason. And the other reason is, if this thing can be co-opted, we can replace this thing with a new version, which is not dangerous for the control system, because there's no real genius in the new version. There's no danger of something good happening, and so everyone can still be controlled easily. It's like, I think a good version of that kind of thing is often you get things replaced by stage shows. You'll have some incredible artistic phenomena, and then at some point you'll get the stage show version, you know, like the stage show of Lord of the Rings, or the Beatles stage show, or whatever. I'm not saying all of these things are insidious in that way, but it's that kind of thing, you know, where you get the fake version, and then often the fake version tends to become more popular, or at least after or at least there's an element of like forgetting about the real one, you know, sort of forget about that and have this nonsense version, which, you know, money can be made from, and also it's to shoo away the good stuff. So genius is conditioned out of us. We're told that genius is a good thing and to respect it, but they know very well, the establishment, you know very well that it's not a good thing for them. It's a danger to them, and so we're shown genius at a distance on a pedestal as something remote and alien, like Mozart or whatever. To respect that, to read about that, to write essays about that, whatever, but also to keep our own genius at bay. So the conditioning is the reason why I think, like most people, are not aware that they have genius. And how do you relocate your genius? Yeah, I was thinking about that. I don't know. Some people are just stubborn. Or some people are just like born with a lot of genius, like unsuppressed and left over, and so they sort of go for it anyway. Some people in between. Everyone's different. But I was thinking about it, okay, because of the conditioning, well, a good way to find your genius is to cut everything off. No, cut everything off. I don't mean, you know, sort of like remove parts until you find your genius. No. I mean, you don't even have to do it literally, but if you shut off and like close down rather any connection with external influences like fashions and popular notions, political correctness, whatever it might be, anything which is sort of given to you on a plate as popular thought or generic thought, or anything, or any kind of like any kind of advertising, or any kind of sway by political notions. I don't know if I'm putting this right, but basically what I'm saying is, like, imagine you're in a flotation tank. You know, the flotation tanks where you're in there, and I've never actually been in one, but I'm told that it's like you're in there and you're everything's quiet, everything's dark, and you're separated from everything and just kind of floating as if in space in this sort of liquid. So imagining that in a psychological way, you were in a kind of flotation tank whereby all of the influences you just shut down. The reason then being that you were alone with yourself, right? And you would find then that you would maybe become aware of like things like your neurosis and fears, desire, all different kinds of emotions, all kinds of wounds, boredom, frustration, all of these kind of things, a lot of them being sort of quite problematic, kind of like things that everybody has. All of these things that you find that you have, right? If you switch off the lights and everything else, you find what you've got, and you find that there's all of that stuff. Everyone will have a slightly different version, but everyone's got that kind of thing. But then there will also be good stuff, like, humour and love and inspiration, and possibly even just a buoyancy of some kind of happiness, and some kind of like discerning feeling of there being judgment existing within you. I don't mean like moral judgment or anything like that. I just mean a sort of discerning nature within you, which is your own and is not intellectual. Not really. I mean, it's not like a kind of rational discerning. It's just like an intuition, maybe, or a sort of something that knows what it likes and what it doesn't, and has a sort of almost like a kind of sagely discerning nature. Does that make any sense? I think that basically, if you look around in yourself, in your mind and everything, you'll find many things, but there is this kind of abstract, kind of discerning nature in there as well, which is hard to define, really. And I think that maybe that's your genius, right? And I think if you can find that, you see what's happening is that you have that discerning nature, but then you also have everything and everyone else telling you what to think and do. So the idea is that if you can find your innate knowing, so that you can actually decide for yourself what you think is right, what you think is wrong, and on a very subtle level, aesthetically, the subtle differences between things. If you can find that, then I think, well, that is your, that's your, what is it? You have to please this in order to start behaving in a genius way, just a little bit. For instance, if you were trying to compose music, which is the kind of thing associated with geniuses like Mozart and Beethoven and Erik Satie or whatever, if you were trying to compose music, then to compose music in a genius way, you wouldn't have to be any good reading music, or you wouldn't have to be particularly sophisticated. You wouldn't need to know any chords or anything like that. You would need to know, if you're using a piano, for instance, that the piano goes up and down, and that's how it works. You would need to know that, and then you would have to please your genius, this sort of inside this kind of discerning nature. All you would have to do is listen and go up and down and play around and try to please this thing. And it could just be two notes or whatever. Like it could be Hey Jude, by the Beatles. Hey Jude, which is just like literally two notes. But those two notes are genius, And it's a case of, can you differentiate between any two notes, or those two notes, which are genius because in locating those notes, you've pleased your internal genius, and so you have been told what to do. Instead of being told what to do by anybody else or by propaganda and conditioning, your genius has told you what to do. Those notes were pleasing. And so that's the starting point for making this bit of music. It doesn't have to be difficult or complicated, but there is such a thing as right and wrong in a sense. It's not random. It's like, but it's so subtle that it seems random because you can't, necessarily put it into words or conceptualize it like an equation or anything like that. You just got to feel your way around it. So yes, I think that an interesting thing to do is to switch off all the lights, not literally, but switch off all of these other influences, and then try and find something within yourself which knows what to do anyway, and then try to please that. And then once you learn how to please that sensibility, you then you've become familiar with what genius is, and you can practice then in genius, and you become more and more accustomed to that and better at that, and then gradually you can maybe start to achieve things which are a little bit genius, which is a fantastic thing. But the problem is also that once you start to kind of bring your genius out of its kind of dormant, slumbering state, lots of problems will then result from that, because you will then be putting yourself at odds with the control system, which means you'll also be putting yourself at odds with most people that you know, because everyone's conditioned to some degree, and a lot of the time it's just unconscious, but you're doing something which is very rebellious and something which is threatening to the establishment, or whatever, so you'll find maybe that it won't go down very well normally. Problems will come with it. Like if you start trying to think for yourself and being a genius, and especially if you start to succeed, if you do actually start to succeed in doing genius things, accomplishing genius things, and living moments of genius, where things just happened with grace, and you understood it at the time, but it was so subtle that you could never have worked it out consciously, blah blah blah. If you start to succeed in experiencing moments of genius, stuff like this, like in that case, like if it actually works, you'll have a lot of problems coming your way, but also there'll be a lot of good things. You'll probably, like, with your closest friends and family and the people that you're closest to, you may end up having more kind of deep and fulfilling kind of relationships, and you might be able to achieve things which you really love, and which validate your life, and you enjoy doing it, and you'll feel more dignified. You'll feel like you are who you are meant to be, like kind of like, say there's a little boy who's raised to wear dresses. He's not gay, he's not a transvestite or anything like that. He wants to be a boy, but his parents make him wear dresses for some reason. The boy probably would feel very uncomfortable about that, might even get used to it, but the day when he stops wearing dresses, he'd probably feel better, He'd probably feel a lot better about that. And I think that's what it's like once you start to kind of like bring your genius out. You feel more dignified, and you feel more comfortable, and you feel like you feel right about yourself, and you feel that things are better. At the same time, people will start to feel wrong about you. Normally it will upset people to some degree, or people will start ignoring you. You'll become a bit of a freak. So you'll feel better about yourself, but mostly you'll get negative reactions, and you might get one or two very, very positive reactions, and also in the long run, you never know, you might write a symphony or something like this. It's basically a good thing, but it's on a superficial level, the side effects are mostly bad, I think, unfortunately. But I still think it's worth doing. Even if, like, for instance, you get someone who wants to learn guitar, and you say, well, if I learn guitar, I can be in a rock band, and then, like, loads of people think I'm amazing, and girls will like me, and I might be famous, and I might make lots of money, and it'll be really, really good. And maybe none of that happens, or maybe everyone thinks your band is shit, or whatever, but if your music does actually happen to be good, anyway, you just, this guy who's like, let me play guitar, it's like he's sitting at home and he's playing guitar, and he loves the sound of it, and he enjoys playing, and feels noble in a sense, and beautiful, that something good and authentic is happening, and it's just a personal enjoyment, and he feels better about himself. And I think that that really is the essential benefit of bringing out your genius, because the main thing is that you'll just feel right. It's not really about trying to achieve anything other than you know, just within your own little mandala. You might make a sculpture that you love, and you have it in your house, and one or two people think that that they love it too, and so you can achieve things, you know. Actually, there are a few geniuses out there who actually like really smashed it, you know, like people like Stephen King, or Paul McCartney, or Woody Allen, or Martin Scorsese, or Bjork, or loads of people. Well, not loads, plenty of geniuses who really excelled as geniuses, and mostly people loved them for it, and they made loads of money for it, and they didn't really have to do anything else other than express their creative genius and live by grace and beauty and everything, and fantastic. So that's really good, you know, when it happens, but it normally doesn't happen. And also, to be that successful as a genius, not as a bullshitter, but as a genius, to be that successful, you have to really be a genius. You have to have gone through this process of finding your innate knowing, but then you have to have really like become a muscle man of that. You have to have really excelled, and then to have the fortune as well, not to be you know, wheeled off and guillotined, but in fact to actually be placed upon a pedestal and rewarded for it. Because people are rewarded for abandoning their genius in today's society. Basically, that's where all of the rewards are. If you're a good boy and you say, I'm not going to think of myself, I'm going to do what you tell me to do, then you get the rewards. So if you say, no, I actually want to be a good person, I want to be a dignified person, I want to be a wise person, I want to achieve like truthful, great sort of things, or try to, or on a small scale do that. If you want to do that, you do so at a cost, you see. So it is amazing that you have these one or two people who just like have like amazing lives, really. Thank heavens. This is great. But like, I don't know, maybe that's because you need a few of them out there, otherwise it would get a bit suspicious. But yeah. Yeah, so genius. Yeah, everyone's got a bit of genius. I think there's this great line by Charles Bukowski, who is a genius writer. I think probably, like, I don't know, he's my favourite writer, actually. Along with Tolkien. But Charles Bukowski, who's probably the most kind of pared down, simple, but powerful writer out there. That's how he excels. And he famously said, style is the answer to everything. And it's I think it's the beginning of one of his poems. It's a great poem. And yeah, I think that line is relevant to the idea of genius, because, okay, that line, style is the answer to everything. What that sounds like, could sound like, is it could either sound sarcastic, like a funny idea. Actually, is a funny idea. The idea that you answer everything through style, and then it's okay, as long as things are stylish. Or it's like there's another line by Charles Bukowski where he says, the most important thing is how well you walk through the fire and stuff like this idea of style. So yeah, it could be that he's saying sarcastically or half truthfully, but knowing that it's a funny idea. Style is the answer to everything. Just be stylish, darling, kind of thing. Or it could be it could be the kind of thing that a very superficial person might believe or say, just because they like style and they're not really interested in anything else, and kind of genuinely believe that. But I think that where Bukowski is coming from is he's familiarized so much with his own genius and sort of become his own genius that I think you go through a process there where you understand more and more and more about the dynamics of the mind when it comes to that kind of thing, and you understand like the mechanisms and stuff, not just like this and that, but you understand how everything kind of fits together. I think as part of the journey, you need to understand that. And it's interesting because Charles Bukowski, I believe, did believe, he's dead now, but like, did believe that style was the answer to everything. But you see, Bukowski found his style. He discovered style. He discovered grace by simplifying and attempting in no way to be pretentious or to be stylish. Right? He's the opposite of a superficial style over substance kind of person. That's what he's famous for. He's the opposite of style over substance. If anybody was, Bukowski. He's the master of that. So he's the opposite of stylishness. And that's why his work is so stylish, and why he was such a man of grace. He's just this alcoholic kind of slob guy, but just like a beautiful speaker, so charismatic and just so powerful. Everything, like everything about him was poetry, right? And he found that style by stopping trying to be stylish. And yeah, the thing about saying that there is this genius that everybody has, and also I think it's because everyone is part of everything else, and so ultimately it's possible to understand everything else because you can tap into it. But I think that the nature of that genius actually has to do with nature, with the way things really are. And I think why it's a good thing, why it's a beautiful thing, is because it's the way things should be, and it's the way that people are naturally. And so you kind of like, you remove all of the crap, you remove all of the conditioning, you see through your neurosis and your fear and your desire and all of this stuff, and you pare everything down to one word or whatever it might be, or two notes, and effortlessly, just the way that your genius feels things are right, things slide into place, and you find style. You know, you find a beautiful two notes or whatever, and you find your genius.